Just be looking out.
Hello,
It's right there.
Good.
I'm Pete George, and we are live on Game Changers with Vicki Abelson. Our guest tonight is Bruce Vilanch.
Thank you.
Okay, wait.
Thank you.
I have to fix this here because
She's
it'll make me
fixing it.
crazy.
That's good.
Bruce,
My mother's dead. Someone has to do it.
Oh no!
We're open on that note.
All right. So since we're talking about your mother, and just before we came live, we
Yes.
were talking about Patterson, New Jersey.
We were.
Oh.
Anybody there from
Okay.
Patterson?
So we've got stuff going on.
Wow, who's calling?
No, it's an Amber Alert on
Everybody's phone?
on somebody's phone, on maybe everybody's phone.
Probably,
Is it coming
it
out
could
on
be.
everybody's phone? Mine's on Do Not Disturb, so I don't think it can come out on mine.
It could be. I don't know. Mine's
we need
in my
that
pocket.
to stop. We need the phone to go away.
Talk about timing.
But it's not
Ron!
buzzing.
No.
What happened? Did somebody kidnap somebody?
There's an Amber Alert.
It's
Or
okay.
is-
You unplug the internet.
Trump,
Okay.
roll over in bed and lean on the button.
So we are, we're not moving on mine, but it appears that we're live. You can't tell.
It appears that we're praying.
It appears that something is happening. Let me open another. Are we live, Pete?
We are live.
We're live, and we're moving because we're stopped
Maybe.
on this. Okay, so we're having some internet issues, but we are very grateful to be here at Ron Frederick's house. Thanks, Ron.
Hey, thanks, Ron.
We're in West Hollywood because Bruce doesn't like to travel to La Piñata's too far to go.
She's out there. She's at a place where the golf course is on a hill. It's graduated. They have this weird country club there, which is like, the golf course is like terraced, isn't it? I don't know. I don't play golf.
I don't play
just
golf
watch
either.
people play
And
golf, but
I
I
thought
thought
they don't let Jews in there.
that's right. That's the other reason.
Yeah, they don't let Jews in
I
places.
just thought
like
it was
that.
odd. You tee off and the ball goes over the side of a cliff.
No, come on.
Like somebody, and to the next hole's down there. It's like a big version of miniature golf. Isn't this fascinating?
All right, so let's talk about what's fascinating. So being a kid in Patterson, New Jersey, did you? How was that for you back then in the '60s?
It was it was fun. I mean, it was an amazing. I was different. I was not an athletic kid, so I had a vivid life of the mind, and that meant I wasn't all that popular because the popular kids are the athletic kids, and I was kind of like fat and ungainly and
But you were
and
funny.
I was more interested. But I was funny. But I was more interested in adult things. And,
such as?
Theater and the movies and reading and all the kind of anti-intellectual, the intellectual stuff, which they were all sort of like anti-intellectual,
Right.
But at the same time, I liked all the pop that was happening, all the pop culture, and watching Dick Clark on American Bandstand. Dick Clark was so old that he did a regression and discovered in the previous life he was Dick Clark. Now, there are people who were just maybe too young to know what I'm talking about.
I think our audience probably will get that joke.
Patterson was it was stereotypical Happy Days kind of place, and when I would go to my high school reunions and
you went.
I've been. I go because I liked the. I wound up in. By the time I was in high school, I liked a lot of people. I was. Really
You were probably
friendly.
popular by then.
I was because I was in the shows and I was writing the school paper. So
there
I was,
you go. You were
so
very
I was
popular.
already a mach.
So when okay, so
It's a
Bill
French
Fun
expression.
said
It
that
means
we
a big shot.
look like sisters.
What
Bill Fun-
we were commenting that we both had the same. We went through the same blonde machine.
Well, except yours is real and mine is not.
Mine is
Yes,
real. It's
yours
true.
yours is
but
real.
no, I mean, of course. I mean, at my age, at this point, it would be white. But this was my actual child color, and it got dirty blonde as I got older. And around in the early '80s, I made a picture with Jane Fonda called "The Morning After."
I love that movie.
Sidney Lumet's only movie made in Hollywood, and I have one scene left. I play a bartender, and she comes towards the beginning of the movie to cash a check because I'm an old friend of hers.
Okay.
And there was more, but it was a mystery that was never really mysterious. So when they tested it, the audience was unhappy. So they went back and shot a whole bunch of stuff to make it more mysterious. And it wound up doing very well because it was a character study for Jane.
Right.
And she played an alcoholic who may have killed somebody. But she was in a haze when she did a blackout. So she got an Oscar nomination for it. But
yeah, she was wonderful.
it was. And so Sidney Lumet was directing it, and he had, was a famous New York director, and he had never done a picture in Hollywood.
I didn't know that.
And when I went in to read for him, he said, "You're just what I'm looking for." He said, "Do you mind going blonde for this?" I said, "Excuse me?" He said, "This is the only picture I'm ever going to make in Hollywood. I want everybody blonde." So, I mean, the only person who got away with not being blonde was Raul Julia.
Wow.
Jeff Bridges was blonde. Jane was blonde.
Is that true?
One of the plot points is Jane has to become, she either is a blonde who has to become a brunette or blonde. I forget, vice versa. Anyway, so I said, "You're paying for it. Which way to the bottle?" And
So
that was
really?
that, and I never looked back. So I sent my mother pictures of myself.
Yeah.
When they did the dye job, and she said, "Oh, you're back to your original color." I said, "What original color?" She said, "This when you were born, you were a towhead. You were a very, very blonde Nordic-looking person."
Okay, so the real color was like a dirtyish blonde?
No, it became dirty blonde as I got older. It lost some of its platinum luster.
Well, this absolutely suits
And I
you.
retained it, and now I'm just like, I'm going out blonde. That's all I can tell you.
So am I.
More fun.
It is more fun.
I mean, that ad campaign worked. It is more fun.
It is more fun. Okay, so let's go back to how this all started. So
Yeah.
you're in Patterson. You're an intellectual kid.
Yes.
Maybe not that popular, but always funny. I'm thinking you're always funny. Are your parents funny?
My mother was hysterical. She was from a family of people who were very funny. They were all characters. In fact, she had an uncle, my uncle Mickey, who was a vaudeville comic, and he was a Catskills comic. He was not a successful Catskills comic.
Mickey what?
Mickey Landau. He was not successful, and but everybody else in the family kind of buoyed him up. And he was adorable and
So wait,
funny.
what does it mean? My father was a master of ceremonies in the Catskills. That's what I'm asking you. So what does it mean not to be a successful Borscht Ball comic?
Well, he never graduated beyond that circuit, and he was not a star on the circuit. He would open for, Kate Smith.
Yeah.
He would open for big singers and Broadway types who played the Concord and the Gross Singers and the Neville and Browns and Kutchers. But he never broke out on his own and became a headliner.
I got
and I don't know that he made a real living, at it, because he was a Catskills comic. And if you've ever seen Billy Crystal's picture, Mr. Saturday Night, about a guy who was an old Catskills comic.
I am in the original Buddy Young Jr. sketch on Saturday Night Live.
This is like a riff on Buddy Young, but it's different. And one of the wonderful moments in it is when he's talking to his agent about this job, and he said, "That was my winter."
Yeah.
Because when the guys didn't have, they had to find something to do in the winter.
So what did your uncle do? My father was a Hebrew teacher.
He worked for his brothers.
Okay.
Basically, my uncle, his brother, my Uncle Lou, my great Uncle Lou, was in the baby furniture business, but he moved out to L.A. And they were in Beverly Hills and doing very well in selling baby furniture to stars.
Nice.
Baby furniture maker to the stars.
Hey, look, if you're going to do it, why not do it to the stars?
Absolutely right. And that's how they did that. But when we got together, their side of the family was hilarious, and they were really, each one was a character. My father's side of the family was rather dour. He was a doctor, and they were all hardworking German, immigrants, and his mother was a doctor, his father was a doctor.
Wow.
They had a practice together. They were optometrists.
Wow.
And my aunt was a school teacher, but she was an activist. My aunt, whose name was Blanche Vilanch. They gave her that at birth. That's why
They were funny people.
I wanted to meet them. Well, they were funny on the other side, but anybody who would do that to an infant, I thought, how can you name a kid
Blanche
like that?
Vilanch.
But then, there was my father. I had an uncle, Max Sachs. So maybe it was like a family thing. I don't know. It could be.
So when did you know? Were you always a funny kid? Like, did you know right away?
I made faces in the mirror, and I acted. I was a child actor, and my parents encouraged that because I was happy doing it.
So what did that mean when you were little?
It meant that I slept to New York. My mother would take me to auditions and stuff, and I got commercials and.
Was it your choice or her choice?
Oh no, I wanted to do it, and they recognized that it was what I wanted to do.
And they supported you.
Oh yeah, because I was happy doing that, and I wasn't terribly happy with the kids I knew because I was not totally accepted by them. I felt I probably was, but it never felt that way. You know how your interior life doesn't often mirror.
Did you know when you were a little kid that you were gay?
Not when I was a little kid.
But when did you know?
I don't know. I guess it must have been 10 or 11, I suppose. I didn't know I was gay. I knew that I liked boys and girls, and I was fascinated by all of that. And that actually holds true today. I realized that I was any girl I was interested in deserved better than some guy who was going to go off and cruise the Greyhound station. So I made a choice. When they say gay, it's a choice. I said, well, in my case, I chose to be authentic. I chose to be who I really am.
Yes.
But I'm not a gay man who is repelled by women.
Yes,
and I can function with them. I just don't because it's a lot of trouble. And I'm really, when it comes down to it, not that interested in them as I am interested in men. So once I became, I solidified that in my mind. It made life easier. But I had girlfriends up to the end, through high school, through college. I was intensely in love with a girl in college, and my parents were terrified I was going to go off and get married. I was going to elope and get married.
What do you mean intentionally in love?
No, intensely.
Intensely.
It's these
so intensely in love.
I was crazy about her. I was crazy about another girl who I'm still very friendly with, who married we used to double.
Yeah.
And she married the other guy. I was her date, and the other guy, she was the one she married, and the other girl is a lesbian.
That worked out well.
And is married to a woman and lives in Vegas. But it was just strange. We were that was our Saturday night. We were a double couple. We went to the movies together and dinners. And
so you did all that kind of normal.
I did everything
normal stuff.
Through college, but in college I was much more active with men, and eventually I had to tell this girl who I was crazy in love with that it was just not going to happen because I wasn't ready to make a commitment to anybody. And especially not to a woman. There wasn't a man who was looking for it, but we had talked about this, and I don't know that she was intense on doing it either, but it was something that we talked about.
But so that didn't impact you as a child.
Not as a child, no.
So an outsider because you were not into sports.
Well, I was not into sports, and but I think that when you're not into sports and you're not interested in other things, the guys who are back then,
right,
used it to what we didn't call it bullying then, but it was bullying. But bullies were bullies. I mean, it wasn't. The bullying was not aimed at your sexuality because there weren't any gay kids.
Right.
I mean, nobody was coming out and saying, I'm gay.
Right.
This was before Stonewall. Adults weren't coming out and saying they were gay.
Right.
So it wasn't because of that, but they sensed that I was different. They sensed that I was not, interested in the things they were interested in. So they would use that as a wedge. There was somebody to pick on.
And how did you handle that?
Well, by telling them a joke.
Okay.
So that was by being funny.
And did it work?
Oh, yeah. Whoopi says it gives you a head start. You can run. I say, I used to have a phrase I used in the movie about me, Get Bruce. I tell a story about, I forget what the phrase is I use. And she said, what he means is you get to run. Yeah, you get a head start.
Okay, so you're a little kid. You go into auditions. What's the first gig? What do you score? What's your score?
Wow, I was a child model. I did something where I didn't have to speak. It was Lane Bryant.
Oh, I love it.
Which was a store devoted to plus size women.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And
but it's plus size women. What were you doing in there?
Because they had a child's line. They started a children's line called.
Refreshing.
What was it called? Originally, Stylish Stouts was that was one of the names.
That's just.
And they had something. I forget what there was something else. It was before Stylish Stouts, but and there was an ad campaign, and looking for this photo. It was me and another guy, another sort of Jewish-looking kid, and we were.
I didn't know Jewish-looking people even got into commercials.
Well, this was the idea. There were these two ethnic types, and we were on like a couch, and in between us was Carol Lynley, who was
the whitest
Chick Cigars, and looking gorgeous. And the message was, if you put your fat Jewish kid, in Lane Bryant clothing, in Fabulous Fats or whatever it was, they will attract this goddess beauty. And
I am so appalled by this
when
right
I think
now.
about it, I know. When
It's
I think
horrible.
about it, it was the idea. The idea. I mean, I don't think that they do. I think it was just different people who were obviously not like
Chicks are gorgeous.
Yeah, who weren't like well bred.
Goyish,
It wasn't two guys named Schuyler and Chadsworth. You know, they were two neighborhood-looking guys, and at the time I looked like that. I looked like William Bendix from Life of Riley. I bore a strong resemblance to him.
Now, for those of you,
well, he's in a million movies, but that was his TV show, which made him, like a lot of character actors in movies, when TV came in and they moved over to TV and became huge stars, which they'd never been in pictures because they were character actors.
Right.
So William Bendix is one of those, and we used to say, "You look like William Bendix." And then later on, we refined that to Peter Ustinov, who I also resembled, and who I got to know, and who said,
Really?
"Yes, you are my long lost son." What was her name? That woman.
Oh. So you're doing commercials. Are you a good? You must be a good student in school because you're reading and you're writing and you're.
I was terrible in math. I had the traditional English majors thing. I mean, I would go. I would SATs. They would say, if you get 1,000, you can get in most anywhere. I said, yeah, not if it's 700 in math, in English, and 300 in math.
Yes.
So, but I was just terrible. I just couldn't make change, and it was just sad. I had tutors who would run screaming, pulling their hair. Because I just couldn't get to this day. I just don't get it. I have accountants, I have people who do math for me.
That's very good. I can do the adding and subtracting. I just couldn't do the equations. Geometry was beyond my.
Well, our art standard thing was, am I going to use this calculus crap in my real life? How many of you, have used algebra on a daily basis? It was always. That was a joke, and it was then the people who went on to be rocket scientists say, "Well, I do."
Yeah,
that was not. That was so. I had that. So when I graduated high school, I went to Ohio State because I could get in. I wanted to go other places. I wanted to go to Carnegie, but you had to have good math, and you had to. I know these actors who have good math. I'm scared of them. I'm absolutely terrified, and I had friends who went to Carnegie. Northwestern was another place where you had to have good math to be in the theater program, which I, to this day, do not understand, because there's so many actors who lose all their money. I'll never understand. So I went to Ohio State, and
did they have a good drama department?
They did. They did. They had a very good one, and they also they had a good theater, and they had a good journalism department. So I was a journalist. My parents wanted me to have a journalism major because they thought newspapers will never go out. They didn't anticipate.
Nobody knew what the internet
the internet was going.
All right, so wait, let's go back to this. When did you start writing? When did you realize that?
I started writing when I was in high school. I guess I was editor of the Criterion, which was the East Side High School paper. The Lean on Me High School, Morgan Freeman.
Really?
Yeah, playing our principal, Jolton Joe Clark, who was the one with the baseball bat. Although he was later. I left. By the time I left, it was before the heavy drugs came in and before.
Okay, wait, stop. Let's go there. Was that your world for a time?
What?
Heavy drugs?
No. I mean, I did drugs. I was a child of the '60s.
Yeah.
I did all of that stuff. But I mean, after Sergeant Pepper, things got much heavier, and I was in college by then because I'm very old. So when I got. When I graduated high school in 1965, the heavy stuff hadn't come in yet. And it all happened later on during Vietnam.
Right.
But I was in college by then.
Were you? Did you have a number?
Yes,
lottery number?
I did.
What was your?
It was like 156, something like that. I think that was it. It came close.
Really?
Yeah, I remember because it was the same as the exit on the Garden State Parkway. That's the Patterson exit, 156, and that was also my draft number. I didn't have to. I was called up, absolutely called up.
Did you have a plan?
Well, first of all, I was still in college when I was called up, and I had a student deferment.
Right.
And if you left college, you immediately got a 1A, and you were called up. But I was called up, and you had to go do the physical and all that. And I said to my parents, I'm going to check the box. And what that meant was there was a questionnaire, and they asked you various things, and one of the questions was, are you a practicing homosexual? And I was going to check the box, and if you did that, you would automatically got a discharge, but it was not an honorable one. You were 4F, but not for good reasons, and that was noted. So,
and whoever saw that would know that.
Did
that follow you anywhere?
Everywhere. I mean, if you applied for a government job, I mean, when they asked for your service record, that was on your service record. And my parents said, "That's kind of drastic, don't you think?" And I said, "Well, A, it's true, and B, I don't want to ever have to ask for a job someplace where that's going to disqualify me. I don't want to work there or with those people anyway."
Good.
So I went in and I did it, and I checked the box, and then when they look at it, they go, girl, bye.
To see if you look
gay? No, they just kind of, well, because a lot of guys were faking it. They didn't realize what the consequences were. So or they were willing to live with them. I don't know. A lot of straight guys were faking it. So they take you off to a side room to see the shrink. And the shrink looks at the thing and says, "Are you a practicing homosexual?" And I said, "No, I've got it down." Don't worry about me. And then they start asking you really gross questions.
Oh, come on.
Yeah.
Like
really,
what?
Just about sexual practices. They want to see if you're for real. So they want to know what you've done sexually. And they start asking you to describe things. It's kind of like what they would do with green card marriages.
Right.
Where they separate the couple and they ask them each other about what side of the bed does he sleep on, and with this one it was like, are you a pitcher, are you a catcher, that kind of stuff, and in details. I mean, and this doctor.
Did they have the lingo?
Yeah, they had rehearsed. They were practiced. They were practiced. They had it down.
They had it down.
And so I answered all the questions to their satisfaction. I was watching the shrink pale because he was an army shrink. So
Did you give him a couple of nice details?
Yeah, juicy, absolutely. One of them involved juice, but that's another story. And so he and then he gives you, after that he gives you the talk about this will be on your record and all that kind of stuff, and how do you feel about that? And
what was your response to that?
What I had said
Did
to
you
you,
say
I said the same thing,
good.
And he said, "Well, okay." Kind of, you're brave and good for you, and I think they said we're missing out on something because you're obviously a brave guy, and we could use a brave guy. And I said,
Isn't that interesting?
Right, but thank you, but can I go now? But there were a lot of straight guys who they can't answer those questions, and so they say, "You're faking this, aren't you?" It's kind of like the guys who drink boiling water before they have their temperature taken, and I mean, there were all these little things you could do, that were to disqualify yourself.
And did it ever come up in your life?
No.
That record?
No.
Yeah.
No, because basically the war was already almost over. The lottery folded up shortly after that.
Right.
And so it never got farther than that. And I never. Maybe somebody, I don't know. I went to the Chicago Tribune after college, and that was kind of like a right wing bastion. It was still owned by the McCormick family, and they were very right wing. And I was the first I was the first person in the history of the tribute to ask for Yom Kippur off.
Did they give it to you?
They had to look it up. Yeah. Sure. I mean, it was unbelievably. It was crazy right away.
How did you get that job?
I wrote a letter to the New York Times about a movie, The Graduate. And I wrote a letter because I forget there was a critic on the Times who had said something, and I thought I was the critic for the Ohio State Lantern, circulation 50,000.
Okay.
And so I was hot spit, and I said I don't know that he got it. I mean, from the point of view of somebody who was the age of the character that Dustin Hoffman played,
Yes.
which even Dustin Hoffman wasn't.
Right. Yeah, he and Ann-Margret were only a few years apart, like 3 years or something. Not many.
Really?
Yeah.
I didn't know it was that.
She was only like in her 30s when she did that. Yeah.
I'm not surprised.
Yeah.
He was. So I wrote this letter, and they published it in the Sunday Times, and
Nice.
they used to run letters then. They don't run letters anymore in the Arts and Leisure section, which we called the theater section back then. And an editor at the Miami Herald saw it, and he said, "You want to come intern at the Miami Herald?" And
Wow.
he's 91 years old. His name is Larry Jinks. His son is Dan Jinks, who produced American Beauty and won an Oscar for it, and is a big time producer.
So wait, this happened from a letter?
This happened from a letter to the Times. I got my job to the New York Times. That used to be their ad campaign.
That's right.
And
it was
that was
true
how
for
that
you.
happened. And then
Wow.
after the internship, I did another internship at the Detroit Free Press.
So wait, before you go on with your career, did you decide I want to be a journalist because you were acting?
No, I wanted a job.
Okay.
I wanted to be an actor, but I found that when I would audition for things, I was...
what kind of stuff were you going up for?
I was going up for plays and movies, and I mean just character parts because I looked older. I had a deep voice, and I was heavy by then. And so I would walk in the room, and there'd be Jimmy Coco and Paul Sorvino and Richard Castellano, and these were all character actors who were older, heavier, and more experienced than I was. And I was, a kid. I did a lot of summer stock and a lot of stuff where I played older parts. So I was accustomed to carrying myself as an older. And I used to say I was born 40 because I looked much older than I was. When I look back at photos now, I think to myself, "You are kidding yourself." Now, I was like, "Well, you look like a kid." But I think back then I really did because I didn't get a lot of stuff, and I think because I was faking it, and so I thought, okay, I'll go be a journalist and I'll get in that way. And I'll grow into myself as an actor. So I went for a job at Chicago Tribune, and they took me.
And what kind of stuff were you writing?
I was a feature writer. I interviewed everybody who came through town, and like Rex Reed, and I was also the second string. I was Gene Siskel was the film critic. I was the second string film critic, which meant I got to see all the pieces of shit that he didn't want to review. I was the second string drama critic, and I was also the first rock critic that they had. But then there was a woman named Lynde who was a real rocker, and she got that. So they sent me to nightclubs and things, and I reviewed a lot of people, and that is where I met Bette Midler, who was an opening act. She came out, and a friend of mine was managing her, and he asked me to go look at her, and I thought she was amazing, and I interviewed her. I wrote a review, and I praised her, and I interviewed her, and the next day she called and said, "That's a very funny interview, you're a funny writer." And I said, "Well, you're funny, you should talk more on stage." And she said, "You got any lines?" And that was the beginning.
Okay, so
From
now
the Paleozoic period.
So, Ron, I'm thinking maybe we should close the door because I'm hearing the traffic, and I don't know if they can hear it online. But I don't know, and I'm hoping that we're still online because it's not showing me what we're doing. Does anybody know? Can you see on your phone?
Yeah, we're online.
We're live.
Once in a while it gets a little slow.
Really?
But
maybe those two satellites are colliding.
Is that what
Isn't
it
that
is?
supposed to happen tonight?
Yeah, I can't. Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
But I think it's under control because there may be a near miss, and I'm not sure what kind of satellites they were, but they're up there.
So Bette. So had you written jokes before?
I had written a couple of things for Kay Ballard.
Okay, how'd that happen?
She played Mr. Kelly's, which was a club in Chicago, and I interviewed her, and we had a great time. And she asked me for material. She said, "You have anything?" She cultivated a lot of young writers. She cultivated Kander and Ebb, who wrote Cabaret in Chicago.
Wow.
They wrote their first stuff for her, their special musical material for her. And, of course, they wrote all of Liza Minnelli's shows. And that Kay started them. She started a bunch of other people.
Okay, so I'm curious about this, how you start. I was married to a joke writer. He was Letterman's head monologue writer, so I'm
Who was that?
Gabe Abelson.
Oh, okay.
And,
an Abelson.
Yeah. He was there when Chef left for a while.
You didn't have jewelers in Jersey, did you?
No jewelers in Jersey. They were all...
there was Abelsons in
They were
in
philosophers and rebels.
I grew up. Mikey
things.
Abelson was a friend of mine.
There you go. So I know his process of how he writes a joke. How did you do... What... Do you remember what your first joke was?
No.
So do you remember when she said, "Okay, write for me," what did that spark in you?
Well,
where did you go?
It always, with her, with a lot of the people I write for, it centered around the music.
Okay.
She had songs that she had to connect on stage somehow, so it became that. It became stuff about those songs, stuff that would lead you into those songs. And also, she was on tour, and I would find out what was happening in the city, and we'd write jokes about that city. And earlier there was a woman named Dorothy Fulltime in Cleveland, for example, who was the local editorialist on television, and she was a Barbara Bush kind of character, and she was just full of hot air. But also, she was a good lefty, I thought, but. She was great to make fun of. So there would be one of those in every town. There was always a scandal involving local people.
So was it a collaborative thing?
Oh,
with
yeah.
You and Kay?
Yeah.
And
they've always been collaborative. I mean, if I didn't want to collaborate, I would be Neil Simon, who takes all of that and puts it in plays and creates characters and gives them voices. But I was having fun collaborating. He wasn't terribly social. He was prolific, but he wasn't terribly social. He was very nice. I liked him. We were friends, and he gave me great advice as I went along.
Really?
Yeah, he was really terrific.
Like in what way?
Just writer-to-writer advice. I mean, he would. He said, never finish anything. He said, get up, and so you have a place to start when you sit down again. So you never have to face a blank page.
Wow.
Or later on screen. And he said, that's how I'm prolific. He said, because I don't finish it, I come and I sit down and then I finish it and start something else while I'm there in the run of the thing.
In the flow.
In the flow, and keep going. And that has served me in very good stead.
That is really interesting.
Yes. Now, you writers out there.
Yes, I'm listening. I like that a lot.
This seminar is my TED Talk is for you.
The blank page is scary.
Oh, yeah.
So you went from being a journalist to writing jokes. In your journalism, were you funny?
Yeah, because I had latitude. I mean, I wasn't one of those journalists who was saying just the facts. I was writing about people and things, and so a lot of time the paper turned me into a kind of a stunt man. I would do things. I tried to break into the Guinness Book of Records.
By
I was going to have the record for eating donuts.
How many was the
I
record
forget
before?
because I threw up and I couldn't make it all the way through because donuts expand after you eat them. I learned this. I tried the world record I did have the record finally. Well, I tried the world's largest pizza we were going to bake. But that was a big professional job. I finally did hold the record for walking sideways.
Oh, come on!
There was a record, and I broke it. And we covered it. It was a big deal in Chicago. I walked from the Tribune Tower to the Water Tower.
Which was
in
how far?
Chicago. It was a mile, maybe. And sideways, which is harder than you think because because at any moment you can fall over if you're walking too fast, and it was a muddy track. So But we had cameras. There was a chopper overhead from the Tribune's TV station that was covering this. I mean, it was that kind of stuff.
And so you got into the Guinness?
Got into the Guinness Book. It turns out that all you have to do to get into the Guinness Book, this is back then, I'm not sure now, because then it was run by the Guinness twins, with these two guys who compiled records. And it was a promotion for Guinness Stout and Guinness Ale. It was all concocted as a promotion. And but it took on a life of its own. Right. Obviously now people who've never heard of Guinness Stout know about the Guinness Book. So they, if you had coverage, proof, that was proof for them that you had done this thing. If you had gotten a newspaper like the Chicago Tribune to say he did it, then that was enough for them, and they put it in the book. And since nobody else, there was no other record. There was a record for walking. There was a record for walking backwards. There were all kinds of no sideways. I did due diligence on this, and so we did and for years I held the record for walking sideways. I think
and somebody bested your record.
Nobody tried because technology brought in more stuff that they wanted to do,
So you just they took you out because it wasn't.
I think they edited me out after a while because nobody was challenging this.
Because I think we should try to challenge that.
Or the donut eater, donut eating either. It was. I did the record for the most number of omelets you could make in. In an hour or in 10 minutes, I forget what it was. Yeah, because there was a record. There was some French chef had done. I made 7 million omelets. So I started making omelets, and it was this incredible waste of food. So we were giving omelets away. Come down to the Trib and we'll get omelets. We're making omelets for you. People were taking truckloads of omelets and reheating them. Taking them to schools and stuff.
So this was just about. Was it for fun? This was for fun.
They were circulation boosters. I mean, it was that even back then, before the internet, people were getting out of the habit of reading newspapers because they would see the news on television.
Right.
And so all the newspapers were suffering, and anything you could do to get people to buy the paper was considered a good thing. Now, I mean, it wasn't. It was. Not something on the front page. They would tease it, and you'd go inside to find the thing. But that lasted for a while. The other one that was a big one was it was called Mr. Mommy, and I traded places with a suburban housewife for a week. She became the rock critic for the Tribune for a week, and I went and took care of her husband and her kids.
You were so way ahead of the thing there.
And John Hughes was a copywriter for an ad agency in Chicago. And years later, when I met him in L.A., he said, I stole your idea.
Come on, Mr. Mom was from that?
He said he said I was inspired by the Mr. Mommy. It was a week-long thing that I did. I covered it.
Oh, that gives a whole new slant to Michael Keaton's.
And so I said, where's my piece? Where's my... But I mean, at that point, it was I had a feeling I was not the first person to do. I mean,
so
role reversal.
Were they chronicling you throughout the week?
Yes, I was writing it every week.
Oh, you were writing.
I was writing every day.
Uh-huh.
I was writing what happened. Yes, actually, it was on a week delay because we did it, and then I came back because we had to write her thing too. Because she was not a writer,
right.
So I had to write both sides of it. Because she was having a great time.
What was she doing? She was just going.
She was living in my apartment, taking care of 2 Siamese cats, and answering the phone and getting the most obscene phone calls from friends of mine. Terrible, and mostly checking up on her kids. And then I was down there, and about a month after the whole thing had aired, one of her kids ran away from home to my place. Bonded with me. This was like the gay kid. At that point, you could tell. Okay. And of course, the paper went crazy because they said, "Oh my God, you can't have a minor living in your apartment with you." And it's like, get rid of him. I said, well, I had told him he could come; it would be a safe place, and so I took him back, and it was a good thing because we all got to sit down and negotiate, not negotiate, but bring him back to the family and finally, it was like an intervention.
Wow.
To talk to the family about what was going on with this kid.
What year was this approximately?
This was like 1972.
So nobody's talking about this stuff
No,
then.
no, but there had been Stonewall in '69,
Mm-hmm.
but not in Blue Island, Illinois,
Yeah,
which
yeah,
was the suburb where they lived. They were very nice people. I mean, they really were nice people, and she was very hip and fun. So it wasn't hard to do this,
Right?
But it was a twist I didn't think was going to happen. And if I had written the movie, that would have been in it. That was not.
That would have been a good twist in the movie. So, okay, so you're writing. So Kay Ballard, you do a review on her show, and that's how you.
I didn't review her. Somebody else reviewed her. I interviewed her. I was a huge fan. I mean, I was a fan from Broadway and television.
Did you go to Broadway shows when you were a kid? Did your parents take you?
Yeah, my father invested in shows. He loved musicals.
Oh.
My mother always wanted to be in them, and she just never became a star. But she gave it up when she married him. But she was a real stage door. I mean, she just
was she a stage mom for you?
Not really.
Mm-hmm.
She was
she didn't push.
No, she was. She was. This was not going to live her life through me. She wanted me to be that, but she was very well adjusted that way. She was controlling, and but that was what mother isn't to a degree.
Well, I'll show you my book later. The
Okay,
title.
yeah.
Well, so what was the first Broadway show you saw? Do you remember?
Yes, it was The Vamp. It was a flop musical starring Carol Channing. It was her big flop.
I've never even heard of it.
And whenever I would mention it, when in later years we were friends, and she would say, "Why do you keep bringing up that turkey?"
That was a good impression.
But it was I mean, to me, it was spectacular. She was like an apparition. I mean, these huge eyes and the lips, and everybody was pink. It was gorgeous. I mean, the sets moved. I mean, I just said, I want to live in this world. It was a musical about a girl who's like a clerk and goes to Hollywood and becomes the Vamp. It was loosely based on Theda Bara, who was a big star of silent pictures, and her real name was something like Velma Zelinsky, and they made her a star, and she played Cleopatra, and so that look is the original look that all the Cleopatras have taken on.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and but she did one role after another of an exotic foreign seductress. And that was what Carol played in the show, was that character, that woman. And, of course, it was a comedy about that. So she was very funny in it. But it didn't last. That was the first.
What was the first musical you were in?
The first musical I was in was probably South Pacific. But it was a summer stock production of South Pacific. Actually, it was first was Oklahoma. I'm sorry, I forgot. I was in Oklahoma, but I went to a summer camp that was run by Ted Mack. Ted
Mack's Amateur Hour.
The Amateur Hour. Ted Mack was like the Simon Cowell. And
where was it?
It was in Great Barrington, Massachusetts, in the Berkshires.
And how old were you?
I was 9. And it was fame in the Berkshires. It was a lot of talented kids and a lot of kids of celebrities. Frank Lesser's daughter was there, Sue Lesser, and there was a ventriloquist named Paul Winchell, who was a big TV star.
I remember Paul Winchell very well.
And his daughter Corky was there.
So it was like a rival to like Stage Door. I think the one.
That was a little previous. Where Danny Kaye went.
Wow.
That was Tamament. That was before that. But it was a camp, and we did shows and outdoor in a big theater, and it was great. It was great fun, but I loved it because there were a lot of theater kids, a lot of people who were like me, who were like theater geeks, and they were kids and weren't conventional kids. I mean, because we were in the Berkshires and we were a member of a camp association of all there were a lot of summer camps around it, and we had a softball team. Because we had to. That was part of the thing of being part of the camp association. And they loved us because they creamed us. Every other camp creamed us. The only camp that we beat was the Falkeen Ballet Camp.
Which was all girls.
No,
No.
it was all
Yeah.
it was all little little faggy boys. It was, we had some on our team too, but I mean they were all the dancers, and they were terrible. They all were in right field. That's where you put the lousiest guy. Right field was my turf, and you'd go out there and there would be 6 ballet dancers in right field like this. Don't hit out here. So that was where I did Oklahoma, and it was incredible. And in fact, Frank Lesser came up to visit to visit his daughter, and he stayed because he decided he wanted to teach some classes. And he was amazing. And he did
you take any of his classes?
I did, but they were mostly about. They weren't about act. He did one about acting in musicals. That was great. Except, he was a writer, and so it was mostly for people who wanted to be songwriters or librettists, which I didn't know I wanted to be at the time. But the amazing part was when he wasn't teaching, he was hanging out, and he was writing the score for a show called Green Willow, which was a very sweet musical that starred Anthony Perkins, and was not a hit. But he was writing, and he didn't read music, Frank Lesser.
Wow.
Which was amazing to me. He would sit at the piano, and he would hum the song, and he had a guy who would play, and you go, yeah, and then the guy would write the thing. And it was amazing to watch this process. And he wrote a song that Barbra Streisand sang on her first album for the show. It was called Never Will I Marry. It's a gorgeous song, and Tony Perkins sang it.
Wow.
Which at the time everyone thought, no, never will he marry. But he eventually did marry a girl I knew, Barry Berenson, and many, many years later. But that was like the takeaway from the Ted Mack camp. And also Ted Mack, who was a wonderful, warm guy, and really loved all these people on the Ted Mack Amateur Hour, which was a weekly show, and we would go into the city and watch it live every whatever night of the week it was on.
Wow!
But he was famous for telling Elvis he couldn't be on the show because he was too sexy. Yeah, he was too sexy. And then Ann-Margret was on the show. Ann-Margret, and she sang Them Their Eyes, and she was very hot. And she lost to a woman.
She lost?
She lost to a woman who played Lady of Spain on The Leaf. With a leaf. She won.
Unbelievable.
It's like America's Got Talent now, where they bring those acts on and they take them to a certain point when you realize that you can't take this act to Vegas and build a show around it. It's it's you and your poodle. It's like basically you have to have some other thing. And
so did you always sing?
I always sang. Yeah, I wasn't trained.
Did you study? I was going to say.
Not really. I took, in college I did, and but I never really actively trained. I had, or as a dancer, I was an eccentric dancer, and they call eccentric dancing, and I sing, and I can stay on key and all that, and so when I did Hairspray, they said, "Do you sing?" I said, "Well, I sing as well as Harvey Fierstein." Because he sounds like this, everything. Very, very low key. He sings all of it, and he shares his key with B. Arthur. They sing way down. So I could sing those songs, but I can sing. I can't sing. And when I got Hairspray, I then went to Eric Vitra, who's the great coach, and because I wanted to be able to do it 8 times a week,
right?
And I didn't want to, lose my voice. I didn't know I needed to learn technique, and he taught me technique, which is.
And has it stayed with you?
Oh yeah, absolutely, sure. Those things don't go away. It's not like a living. It's not like when you're with a real singer, you go out and they've got 7 scarves, like Pavarotti always with the scarves because you have to take care of the instrument. It's the real thing. So no, I've never been that kind of a singer. So
okay, so you're in camp. But you veer. Was it a disappointment to be a journalist when you wanted to be an actor, or were you good with it?
It was kind of a disappointment. I was good being a journalist, but I didn't want to necessarily. I wanted to be a writer, but not necessarily a journalist. And so after 5 years of that, I got a TV show and came out here.
How did that happen?
Yeah, Bette had a dresser who had a brother who had started the Manhattan Transfer, Tim Hauser, and Bette loved them, and Fayette, who was Tim's sister, kept pushing, go see them, go see them. So they put an act together, and they got a record deal. Bette brought Ahmet Ertegun in, and Ahmet signed him to Atlantic, and then they put a show together and showed it to Fred Silverman, who was running CBS, and he bought them for a summer television series. And I came out here to write it, because they used to have those summer TV variety shows. Right. To replace the variety shows that were on, he replaced Cher, who I've written for also for over the years. And I came out and I stayed. We only did 4 of them, and it got great reviews, terrible ratings, but great reviews. And I began getting work. I was considered too hip. I was very hip, because they were hip. And so I had to find my way. I had to do stuff that was not considered hip.
And you've written for like everybody. So what is it about getting into? You just get into somebody's head. You just. Well,
as I said earlier with Neil Simon, who a playwright has to create those voices. I was lucky in that I had those voices to listen to, and I did my homework, and I could adapt what I was writing to them. It was kind of like, instead of Neil Simon, I kind of became Bob Mackie, because he looks at you and he says, okay, you're short-waisted or you're not short. You have huge jugs, so I don't have to do that, I don't have to pad you there. I think the A-line is good for you. I mean, it's like couture, only with words. And I discovered that I was good at that.
And so, what was your daily process? What is your daily when you're joke writing?
I don't have a daily process, because it really depends on what I'm doing, and that's one of the joys of what I do, is that I've always been able to avoid the daily grind, because every day presents a different sort of challenge.
Okay, so let's say when you're writing for the Oscars, and you have, how much time do you have to?
Well, it used to be more. I mean, ultimately, everything is decided when the nominations come out. They used to give honorary awards on the show. They now give them at a separate ceremony in November, and they run a minute on the broadcast. It used to be that when they would announce those things, you could put that stuff together ahead of time. I mean, they would have the show in place by October. They would know who was hosting it, and they would know who the honorary winners were. And then basically when the nominations came out in January or February, because the show would generally be the beginning of March, that's when you would know who was going to be a part of it, and who would be on the show, and what pictures had been snubbed, my favorite word, or just hadn't shown up in the nominees. For example, one year when Billy Crystal was hosting it,
I was just going to get to Billy. Okay.
There was Jim Carrey did a movie where he played Andy Kaufman, and we figured Man on the Moon. We thought that's a slam dunk. He's going to be not, because it's serious and funny and esoteric, and we worked up all of this stuff that we were going to do, that Billy was going to do, and then he wasn't nominated, and so we couldn't do any of it. It was like, it was a heartbreaker, because you couldn't do it. It wouldn't be relevant. In fact, it would almost be mean.
Yeah.
So, and that happens a lot. So the bottom line is that you wind up having a month, maybe. It used to be 6 weeks, and then it got condensed into a month, where you get to actually write everything.
So how did those 2 Billy Crystal shows happen that were just the most
magical? The 2 that we won for, the first one,
was that the one with the musical montage?
Yeah. We hadn't done the movie yet, but we did have the musical musical montage in it. That was it was a great show that got nominated. It was a hit, but the second time we won, it was because of Jack Palance.
Okay, now you were back. You were feeding Billy those lines. Of course you were.
Yeah. It was Jack Palance had been in City Slickers, Billy's movie, and it was the first award up. Whoopi presented it because she had won the year before in that category, and he got up on stage and decided he was going to show everybody how virile he was, and he started doing one-arm push-ups.
That was the craziest thing ever.
First, nobody quite knew what he was doing backstage, and I'll tell you why. Because what nobody realizes, he came out and Billy had done some stuff about him in the monologue because it was their picture.
Right. And
the first thing that Jack said when he got up there was, I crap bigger than Billy Crystal. And the network censor, Mrs. Futterman, let it go through because it was, she didn't want to bleep him.
Right.
But we in backstage, what? And so nobody was listening to anything else. And all of a sudden, he was on the floor doing one-arm push-ups. We go, holy shit! What's he up? What's he doing now? So we realized that whatever he was doing had to be commented on as the thing went along. And so we started pitching jokes to Billy about the different things. And he came out and he started doing a joke, and he got a huge laugh. And he came back and said, "Well, we got to run with this." So we took all of these things we were pitching and whatever we could work in a Jack Palance reference. I mean, there was a hook up to the space station, and so Jack Palance flew up and hooked up that, and there was a number from Pocahontas, the wind, the color of the wind. Was that the color? No, there was something else, and there were kids.
Yeah.
Oh, there were a lot of kids. I forget what the movie was, but it was somebody with like 30 kids on stage, and Billy said, Jack Palance is the father of all those children. And it went on like that. And after a few of them, Billy's manager came back and said, how many more of these are you going to do? And he said, why, is it not working? He said, oh, no, it's working. There's a pool in my row about him I'd like to win.
Is this David Steinberg?
No.
Jack Rollins?
It was Buddy Mora.
Oh, okay.
It was Buddy Mora. Steinberg was backstage writing with us. He was on the writing staff. And it was me, Steinberg, Robert Wuhl, who Arliss.
We had Robert on the show recently. He talked about
it was us. That one was just the four of us. And so we won the following year. We won the Emmy again for that category, just because we tossed out the script and came up with stuff on the slide. And I have to say, with Billy, I think that became a template for that show, and for in fact all of those shows. I mean, now when there's a host, there's always people there waiting to see if is there something that we can use.
Unfortunately, most hosts can't pull it off the way
it's hard. It's hard to pull it off. Although I did have a favorite of mine.
Okay.
It was a Tony Award show. Hugh Jackman was hosting.
Yeah.
And it was another idea that was insane. We had LL Cool J was still is a big star on CBS, NCIS. Los Angeles, and he was CBS wanted him on the show, even though he had like nothing to do with Broadway. They wanted him on, so we said, well, we'll put him with somebody who's very Broadway, and we put him with Carol Channing again, Carol, and they
the pairings are always fantastic.
And so I said, well, they should rap something together because he started as a rapper, and so I wrote this thing that was like very kind of mild rap. And Carol thought, well, that's hilarious. And then she didn't learn it, of course, and neither did he. And they came out to rehearse. And she said, well, I can't see the prompter. And I said, well, put on your glasses, because she had these huge glasses, kind of like that. Very Swifty Lazar.
Yes, that's the joke. The peepers, they're fabulous.
And she looked, very, very gangsta. And
I remember her glasses.
And she said, "Oh, I can see it now." And so they rehearsed it, and I said, "Well, it's hilarious." I said, "Do you have like any real big chunky jewelry you can wear?" Because she was going to wear a tuxedo, she liked to do that. And she said, "Do I?" And so she came back that night with the glasses and this bling that LL Cool J went, "Oh well, all right." And they came out and they did it, and it was hysterical. It was really funny. And then there was a commercial after the award, and Hugh Jackman came out and said, this just in, Carol Channing has been arrested in a drive-by shooting. Which...
Was that your line?
That was mine.
Yes.
I had given it when I saw how it went over. And then I got a note from somebody who said, that's so stereotypical. It's not, all rappers are not, leave me alone, will you, with this. Please, let's get a few rappers and ask them. Anyway, but there's always somebody. But so that was, yeah, you're right. Few people, he pulled it off. But they all try to do it. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. So what it does? It keeps the audience in the now, and it makes you realize it's not canned.
Right.
It's happening live, and so little does that it's great. That's one reason why people tune in.
It keeps people on their toes.
Yeah.
Yes, I agree with that. Was there anybody, you don't have to name names, but that was really painful to write one of those shows for, that just couldn't deliver what you were...
Yeah, not... I try to make them like a banter-free zone, but occasionally you have an idea, and you think maybe this could work. And Keanu Reeves was on, and I thought it'd be fun if he did the Bill and Ted character, which we should have had him with somebody else do it, with the other guy from Bill and Ted, Alex Winter, I think is his name, and he was game to do it, but this was not. This is not his forte. Going out, he was in character, but it was out of context, and I felt bad. I said, "This is, I owe you something. I don't know what." But and with like Johnny Depp, the thing about a lot of these actors is they never work as themselves. They have no character. Billy Crystal works on stage every night live.
Right.
Bette, Whoopi, these are all comedians who work on stage, but movie stars don't do that.
They don't have their own persona.
They don't have their persona, and they don't even know. People don't laugh when they're shooting because they'll ruin the take. So when you say cut, then the grips all laugh, or applaud, which is great. But so it's difficult for them, and I felt bad. Like Johnny Depp said, "I want to be funny," and it was like, you don't need to be funny. You're Johnny Depp. Just because he had done, I think he was nominated for playing Captain Jack Sparrow.
He was actually very funny in that.
And so he was hilarious, and he was doing Keith Richard as a pirate. And he was
great,
and he was hysterical because he's a great actor. And but it was wrong to ask him to do anything like that. And, it's not the worst thing in the world.
So is it satisfying for what you do? So many things. Okay, so you've been an actor. You've done a Broadway musical. You've started your own show. Yeah.
I was Hollywood Square.
Okay, so let's talk about Hollywood Squares. So
everybody can say that probably.
No, so starting.
But once I was there for years and years.
Oh God! So you started out as a writer, correct?
Well, they asked me to be the head writer. This was the Whoopi iteration, and I said yes. And then Whoopi said, "You should host it." And she went to them and said, he should host it. And, of course, they didn't want to piss her off that early. So they said, okay, we'll test him. So they tested me, and they said, you're not exactly what we're looking for in a host, but we'd like to put you in a square. We think you're funny. And they put me next to Whoopi, and I think the idea was I would tame her. But they didn't realize, as I've said many times, they didn't realize that she's really this Jewish guy and I'm really a black woman. Which, ask anybody who slept with me. So we had a lot of fun, but there's no taming to be done. And as a result, I was on TV every night, for like 6 years, and
was that fabulous for you?
It was incredible, and it made me sort of famous. And everything that's happened after is as a result of Hairspray happened because I was on television every night, and they became interested. I had to audition. I had to do all the real stuff, but it wouldn't have happened probably. They wouldn't have thought of me for that.
So how did your life change in that transition from going from the writer to this person that everybody's seeing on TV every night?
It didn't really. Because I didn't become that famous. I didn't. When huge real stardom hits you, it is something quite different. I mean, when I met Barry Manilow, he was playing piano for Bette, and he was accompanying a lot of other people, and we toured around the country and all that. And then his record came out the minute Mandy was a hit, and he was elevated to stardom. And his tours, he suddenly was a star, and his life changed. He couldn't go out. I mean, you'd have to find a table in a restaurant that faced the wall, so they're wearing a hat. I mean, that kind of stardom.
Right.
And I never had that kind of stardom. I mean, it's not.
So talk about what was the stardom? So it was getting a great table at a restaurant. I'm
Well,
sure.
I mean, those kinds of perks happen, yeah, but it's not. I mean, I don't have my own security. You know, I mean, that's how you know somebody is when they have their own security.
No, but I'm
canvassing every place they go.
I'm guessing that wherever you go, people come up to you.
There's a lot. I have the weird kind of stardom where I'll be standing at an airport with a bunch of people doing selfies and giving autographs, and somebody will walk by and say, "Who's he?"
Really?
It's that kind of stardom. Yeah, sure, because it's not Brad Pitt. It's not that all-encompassing sort of thing. That when Squares was on, there were more people, who were there because I was on TV every night, so there was more attention. But I've managed to. I'm a gay icon, so if I go the right part of town, I'm a big deal.
So speaking of that, Paul Lynde. What was your relationship like with Paul?
Well, I wrote for him for years. I wrote for him. He was on the Donnie Marie show, which I was writing, and so I wrote a lot of his stuff on that. And then that graduated to a couple of television specials, and then Squares at the beginning, the very first time. At the end of his tenure on Squares, I was not involved, but I was doing Donnie and Marie, and I was writing stuff for him. He would say, "Come with me to Squares. I haven't got shit," and we'd write stuff in the car. But he was tough to be friendly with because he was a big drinker and he would get very mean. On one drink he was hilarious, and on two drinks it was like the Luftwaffe had just landed. It was very difficult. He was brilliant and funny, and he was unhappy because he wasn't the kind of star he wanted to be. He wanted to carry movies. He saw Mel Brooks and Woody Allen become movie stars,
right? And
it made him crazy because he'd come up with them in New York, and he didn't get. He was a flavor that didn't carry the entire project, and he wanted to be much more than that. And
so, like when Bye Bye Birdie came out, did he think like he was about to segue to that?
Oh, I think so. I think because other people did it in television, and maybe not in movies. I mean, he thought maybe it would happen to him in movies. I mean, I wasn't around him then, but I certainly watched him when he had 2 television series. There was the Paul Lynde show, which opened like a house on fire, and then the ratings dropped every week because he wasn't the guy to carry the show. He was the wacky neighbor, which he did on Bewitched, and they put him in a show called Temperatures Rising. He was it became The New Temperatures Rising, and he was a doctor, but it was more of an ensemble. That stuff just didn't work. It worked when he hosted a special because it was a special. It was something he didn't usually do. Right. But he was on TV every night on Squares, and so he was a big presence, but he wasn't the presence he wanted to be. He didn't want to just come on, do a joke, and leave.
Has anybody hired you that you couldn't make funny?
Oh, yeah. Engelbert Humperdinck. Oh. Lovely man, but wanted to be funny, wanted to change, didn't really want to. I use him as an example because I can't think of too many. I mean, if you're not funny and you know it, clap your hands. Most people know they can't be. I mean, the hardest part is when they just need a little something, a little something here and there, and that requires knowing how to play it. A lot of people we discovered on Squares, the biggest laughs would come from people you wouldn't expect to be funny. They would say something that would be, they didn't know they were saying something funny, and it was hilarious. And
do you have an example of someone like that?
I'm trying to think. You can't.
Like not the joke, but like.
You can't. Like Garth Brooks or Dionne Warwick. Would say, I forget. There was something very dry that she said, and I wish I could remember it. But it was unexpected. Patti LaBelle was like, and even she would say something very big. You know, she would go big, and that was kind of funny. She would like to bluff, Patti, and
that's everybody gets the choice.
Yeah, you don't know if you don't know the answer, you bluff. And or sometimes she would know the answer. So
that wasn't like pre.
Because if the contestant felt that the star knew the answer, they would agree with him every time, because that's how the game was played. If you agreed, then you won. So they were told we didn't know the answer. Sometimes I remember when Little Richard came in, and I sat down with him to review the questions. And he said, I don't know nothing. You're going to have to give it all to me. And I said, well, I can't do that. And he said, well, then, it's all right. I said, but here are the bluffs. We give them bluffs. I said, this could be the answer. We'd give people jokes who we thought could handle jokes. And then we'd give people bluffs so that they would have something to say that the contestant could agree with or disagree with.
I see.
But
you wouldn't give him a right answer.
I wasn't allowed to. If he knew it, that was something else. But
and so you and Whoopi, how did that relationship start?
I'm trying to remember. She did her one-woman show. It was a showcase I was brought to because Mike Nichols was interested in her, and he brought her out here to do a showcase, I believe, for Steven Spielberg for The Color Purple. And it was in the belly room at the Comedy Store, which is upstairs, a little room. And I was part of the audience. And she was brilliant. I thought she was amazing. And I met her afterwards. And she knew who I was because she follows everything. And she knew that I'd worked with Bette. And she was, wanted to get, she wrote all of her own stuff at that point. And then later on, what happens to a lot of people is they write when nobody wants them. And then they become successful, and everybody wants them,
and they don't have write.
They don't have time to write because they are, they're nursing their brand.
Right.
And so there's so much to do. There are interviews, there are fashion layouts, there's this, there's that, and so there's no time to actually write the kind of stuff that got them where they are. So that's when they bring on a collaborator. And I've been brought on by a lot of people in those circumstances, and so it started with then. Shortly after that, actually, some stuff. But it was most of the stuff that I wrote with Whoopi is for site specific, to host this thing, to make an appearance at that thing. When she actually does her stand up, that's really all her. That's her observing stuff. She might run something by me, but that's all her.
And so with Bette, how did the Johnnie Carson thing? How'd that happen?
When she agreed to be on the last show that he was going to have guests on, it was going to be her and Robin. She said, I want this to be like, she had done, I think, 34 appearances on Carson early, before anybody knew her, when he was still in New York. And then she continued to do stuff out here. So she said, I want this to be like one of those early Carson things, where I would come on and sing a song and then talk and then sing another song. And Mark Shaman said that's exactly what we should do. And Mark sat down, the three of us sat down and came up with, she was going to do a number. She did Miss Otis Regrets, which was from her record, and that Mark had arranged. And then she was going to sit with the panel and sing the special material You Made Me Watch You, and then finish the thing with One for the Road. But we constructed this 20-minute segment that was going to be a classic sort of Bette Midler, Johnnie Carson segment, and it just worked like crazy. It just worked like crazy. And the funny thing was that on those shows, the headliner comes out first. And then the next person is not quite as big, and usually the musical act is at the end. And they said, "Well, it's Robin and you, and Robin's going to come out first." And she said, oh, well, she said, do I want to follow Robin? Yeah. And we said, yeah, you should, absolutely follow her. I mean, the two of you, yes, absolutely. And so she did, yeah. But it was funny because stars know themselves. They know the protocols, and they get all of that's how they become stars, how they stay stars. And it was it wound up being brilliant, and she won an Emmy for it.
Didn't you too?
No, she won the Emmy for variety performance, beating Billy Crystal for one of the Oscar shows that I worked on. And he kept saying, I mean, it was a great bit, but...
Did you have to give it to her?
They don't give that award anymore because they found themselves, it was one of those weird categories where you'd have two things like that pitched against, or Pavarotti and Michael Jackson. It's like, who do you give this? Say they eliminated the thing altogether because it was beginning to seem a little silly.
So how about writing for Robin Williams? I've read a quote where you said something like you didn't write for him, you wrote at him or something.
I did. Yeah. I said you would write material, throw it in the cage.
So
it was that was very much having conversations and writing things down, and then he would take stuff and go do it. He'd workshop it someplace and embroider and do stuff and come back, and a lot of it also was site specific for different shows and specific things. And it was wonderful because he was hilariously funny. Obviously, I mean, this is not news, but he was creative and nuts and a sweet, kind guy. I mean, I was mad about him.
And fun to collaborate with?
Yes, tremendous. Yeah, absolutely.
So, who are some of the people besides Bette and Robin and
Whoopi
and Kay and Whoopi? Who else have you loved working
Nathan
with?
Lane.
Ah.
He's brilliant and wonderful, funny, warm, and does the best panel. I mean, if you book him on a talk show, you're getting... It's like Billy. I mean, you're getting a performance. Or Marty Short. You're getting a performance. They don't mess around. They are old school vaudevillians, and I say that with love and respect and awe because to me, that's it. I love that stuff, and it kills me that people aren't coming up who have that training ground or even have the impetus to do that, because you can get so rich and so famous without doing everything, by just doing one thing that you focus on. The idea of coming out and being a full value entertainer has fallen into disrepute, but you don't need to do it. So I cherish the ones who are doing it, and I don't know who they are. Who among the youngins is doing that kind of stuff? I don't know who.
Do you write for any young?
No, I don't think I do. No, I'm writing for me now because I go off and do shows and tell stories and things. And I'm writing plays and musicals and focusing on that now, because there isn't that much variety television. It's award shows, which I've done a lot of, and
are you over that? Been there, done that?
No, I mean, if somebody came back to me and said we'd like you to do this or that one, I still do some non-televised ones, the Producers Guild Awards, which is fun to write because everybody shows up because it's on the path to the Oscars. But it's weird, when you've raced in the Kentucky Derby to be back to racing at Keeneland.
They could really use you. They could really use you.
I'm available. Hello.
So
I don't know. I don't even know who's writing it. I mean, they don't publicize that anymore, really. When they were a host, what happened was there were a lot of television hosts, and they bring a dozen people with them from their own show, and there's no money left in the budget to hire writers. So they hire one person who to cover all the stuff that the writers for the host doesn't. But the last 2 years they've gone hostless, so I don't even know who's written it.
And so how about the Broadway experience? Was that fulfilling that childhood dream to
absolutely.
Be that
being on
opening
Broadway?
on Broadway?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, that first night, crazy?
It was. The funny part was I had done the role for a year on the road, so I knew it backwards and forwards, and 5 other people who had done the national tour with me came along. And we all replaced people who had been on Broadway doing it for 2 years at that point. They had been running. So it was fun to freshen it up for them. But so it wasn't like I was doing a new show,
right,
or that there was like an audience full of critics waiting, and so it wasn't that experience. I've had that as a writer. I haven't had that as a performer. But it was just great. Well, here I am. I'm
Did
on
your
Broadway.
parents live to see that?
My mother did. My mother did. My father had never. So I was writing Donnie and Marie when he died. So I was making real money, which impressed him, because one of the last conversations we had was he said, "I can't do your taxes anymore. You're making too much money.
Oh, nice.
You have to bring professionals in who know show business."
Wow.
And I thought, okay, well, I've made it.
That's really fun.
Yeah, and that was one of the last conversations we had. So.
And it must have thrilled your mother to see you on Broadway.
Oh, kidding. But she never had grandchildren, so this was like her grandchild. She would come in, and they would all show pictures of their grandchildren, and she'd show pictures of me meeting Princess Diana.
So you met Princess Diana.
I did.
What was that like? She was so lovely.
It was I met her a couple of times, but informally, because I had.
Oh, really?
I had friends who were friends with Pamela Stevenson, who was an actress I am friendly with. Is married to Billy Connolly, but at the time she was married to Billy Connolly, and she and Diana were very friendly, and Sarah Ferguson. They were all they were their famous stuff about them running around London. They surprised a bachelor party, somebody's bachelor party with maybe Andrews, dressed as police, trying to break it up, I think. Anyway, I met her through Pam, and we had a bunch of phone conversations because she was like Elizabeth Taylor. There would have been no AIDS fundraising movement in the UK without her. The same as Elizabeth in this country. Elizabeth took it on, and everybody, took her to life. I joke in my show that everybody takes her call. Even the Pope takes a call from Elizabeth, if only to discuss jewelry. But Diana was like that, and so she kept the AIDS thing going. She started it and kept it going, and at one point, we were trying to get her over here to be on the Commitment to Life show, which was a big annual benefit that Elizabeth was behind. And she called me and she said, they won't let me come. They. So that kind of encapsulated it all. I guess she could do it in her own country, but they didn't want her to go to another country and do it, except I think she did go to Africa and do some stuff. Anyway, so I knew her. I didn't know her,
So were there any thrilling people that you've gotten to spend time with because of what you do?
Sure. Vicki
Abelson. So seriously,
the game changer.
So who's thrilled you? I mean, I know. All right, you're close friends, Bette and Billy, and who's thrilled you to meet and. Who were you a star fan? Who were you a fanboy for?
The truth, the ones I came up with, were a different stripe. I mean, but the ones who I idolized, oddly enough, they were not necessarily as weren't thrilling, because when you meet famous people who've been famous for a long time, and you have an idea of who they are, and you want them to be that, and they turn out not to be that. Sometimes they are wonderful in their own right, and but sometimes they are just disappointing because they are you may catch them at a bad time, but they are not that person. And of course, that person that you imagine them to be is an amalgam of all the roles you've seen them play, or the act that they've done on stage, or the TV show that they've hosted, or any of that stuff. So they were more disappointing, although I was awestruck by them. I was still awestruck by them, but not in the way that I expected.
Has anybody exceeded your expectations? Like maybe a B star that ended up being just a fabulous somebody that you adored?
That's a good question. Yeah, but they were. I mean, they remained B stars. So
yeah, but that doesn't matter.
You know, well, I mean, you know, if I talk about them, it's like people
then
going.
they're gonna think, "Oh, I'm a B."
Kathleen Freeman, who's Kathleen Freeman? You know, so, or if they're still watching, yeah, I mean, exactly.
Yeah.
So yeah, there are a lot of people who a lot of the you know the real pros like were fascinating and are still fascinating to spend time with because they've been around and I appreciate what they've done.
How about Johnny? What was your
Johnny?
Yeah,
he was always lovely to me. I mean, I think he was a driven and angry guy. I don't know why. I just think that I didn't know him that well. But in 1980, I was on the Midnight Special. I was a regular on the Midnight Special.
Wow.
It became video had come in, and people wouldn't come out and do their songs live anymore. They would send you the video of their new song, and so it was hard to book the show. And NBC wanted a lot of live performances. They wanted to have a live feeling.
Right.
So Bert Sugarman, who was producing it at the time with Dick Ebersol, had the idea to do like what Bill Maher does. What Bill Maher used to do called Politically Incorrect. And it was like a dorm room set, and it was people having conversation about what had gone on that week in pop culture. And I was on the first one, and David Steinberg, the other David Steinberg, the comedian, hosted it. And when I came in the second week, he had quit, and I was the host.
Oh.
And so it was an episode that ran for 2 years, but it was on at 1:00 in the morning, and I had a small following that knew me. And among that following was Johnnie Carson.
Wow.
And I would go to NBC,
Wow.
and he would come down the hall, and he would say, "Hey, I love that thing you said about so-and-so and so-and-so."
Wow.
And I thought, holy shit, Johnnie Carson's up at 1:00 in the morning watching this thing?
Wow.
And I said, well, I should really be on your show. And he said, oh, you're too hip for my show. Which I thought, even if he meant it, was a great compliment.
Absolutely.
And then, of course, he knew I was involved with Bette, and on the last show, he was around. Although we didn't want him to see anything, we wanted him to be surprised. But he came in, of course, to talk at the beginning. And he had been Bette's biggest booster, and he brought her to Vegas, where she opened for him. It was not a success.
Yeah. Really?
Oh yeah, it was great of him to do it, but it was not a success because his audience was really square. I mean, he used to have Phyllis McGuire open for him. I mean, he had those kinds of singers, and here she was. She was much rawer in those days. Body, and the material was different, and a lot of it, the treatment of old stuff. Was different, and she didn't hit anything on the head. She did it all because it was, she would find an old ballad and do a whole new take on it, and that scared his audience. I think they wanted to just have somebody come out and be conventionally beautiful and sing those beautiful songs. So, but he believed in her, and he brought her in there, and we had a famous story about pulling up to the Sahara Hotel, and the marquee was going up, and it said Johnnie Carson, Betty Milder. And she got out and began climbing up the ladder, going, "It's Midler, and there's no Y in the Betty." And so it was like that. She's had an interesting record in Vegas.
Really?
Well, then when she came back as a headliner at Caesar's Palace, that was a shocker for them too, because we were doing a rock and roll kind of show tour, and then when she did her show again at Caesar's, the Residency, which was the big expensive show, the market crashed, and people stopped spending lots of money on shows in Vegas, and all the high end things began cutting back shows and stuff. So
although now it's like everybody's got a residency.
This is 10 years ago.
Yeah.
That was 10 years
Melanie
ago.
Taylor said to say hello.
Yeah, she was a highlight.
Yeah,
sure, absolutely.
So what excites you the most now?
Well,
Besides that guy.
What can I say without getting into the Me Too quicksand? So difficult. What excites me now?
Do you still enjoy writing? Is it still fun to write for people?
It is fun to write for people. Yeah. Not all of them, but it's some of them is like a chore, but
yeah. But it's money. You get a paycheck.
When you do these big shows, it's like it's good and bad. I mean, there are people who are fun, and there are people who just want to get the job done. Mm-hmm. I think what excites me as an old fart, I love streaming. I like to sit and never leave the house and watch everything.
What do you watch?
Everything.
Okay.
I mean,
favorite things.
Well, I have my own. I love procedurals. I love all of those detective things. I love all the British detective stuff. I mean, I'm always hard pressed to come up with something.
The Fall. Did you watch The Fall?
The Fall.
With
I took one the other day, but that's another story.
Jamie Dornan and Gillian Anderson.
No,
it's my favorite.
See,
binge
that's
it.
What happened.
Yeah.
Who's streaming the thing?
Netflix.
Yeah.
I saw it on Netflix.
Everything's on Netflix.
It's phenomenal, and now I'm gonna forget the name of the ones that I loved. But yeah, I watch all of those Irish ones and all of those. Broadchurch was great.
Well, I love Broadchurch. I even watched the American version.
What's the American version?
The American version was not called Broadchurch, but it was a name like that. It was. It was on Fox, and they changed the ending. So somebody else did it.
Huh.
But and I can't remember who was it. I mean, it didn't make a ripple, but. I watched it to see what they did. Broadchurch was brilliant, and I love Olivia Colman and David Tennant. Mm-hmm. My favorite, actually, is a show called Vera, with Brenda Blethyn, who you will probably remember.
I do remember.
Brenda Blethyn was nominated for an Oscar for a picture called Secrets and Lies, where she discovers that her sister is black. I think is that or
that sounds right.
With Marianne Jean-Baptiste is the other character. And she plays a homicide detective in Newcastle, and there are heavy accents. Mm-hmm. But
I have to put the subtitles on when I watch
those. For reasons that you discover in the show, she is her job, and doesn't get along well with people, but she's brilliant. Mm-hmm. And it's that juxtaposition of knowing what she's doing and having to actually deal with people who don't know what they're doing, and this prickly character that she plays. It's brilliantly written. And Grantchester's another one that's about a vicar who's fallen in England in the 50s.
Are these Netflix shows?
Probably you can get them on Netflix. They're all PBS, and they're all off of BBC and ITV. And those are the British shows. But they're American ones that I like too.
But what I meant, not was what you're binging. What are you loving to do for you?
For me.
Like, do you love to get up and put yourself up on the stage? Is that?
Yeah, I do, but it's hard to keep coming up with new material. And it's hard to keep telling the same stories, and I don't. I don't do it regularly, so now I'm winding down because I'm trying to get a play going that I would do that would satisfy that urge.
What kind? What?
It's a play about my first Oscar show that I wrote, and the crazy guy named Alan Carr who produced it, who was a fabulous flamboyant character to play, and I wrote it for Nathan Lane, and Nathan said, "It's funny, but you should do it." And I like when they say that. So.
Yeah.
Because he liked it, but it's not the kind of thing that he's doing. He's kind of,
morphing.
He's
evolving.
He's evolving. He's gotten more multi-layered. I mean, he does, when he goes on talk shows, he does the comedy, but he wants to explore different things.
Were you a kid who remembered jokes? Were jokes like a thing? For
mean?
you? Like, did you, could you sit and tell ones you didn't write, classic jokes?
Yes, of course.
So, do you have a favorite joke?
God, a favorite? No.
No.
I'm terrible. I used to interview people, and I would ask these questions, and I get it. I never cultivated the answers to a favorite, and sometimes
a favorite's not important.
it's a favorite, and then I'll realize, well, it's totally inappropriate. You can't do that.
You can do it. You can do anything inappropriate here.
No, because
we're totally inappropriate.
Yeah, but the people who are watching are.
No, but
they jump on you and.
No, they don't jump on us here. Pete, do we have any questions for Bruce?
Yeah, we got a few.
You go.
Okay, let's have some questions.
We have a
Bruce.
comment first.
Okay.
Let's see. According to your shirt, you were missing an L, so I tuned in. I can't get enough of the stories. Amazing.
Wow, thank you so much.
And then Rocky Durant says, "Hey Bruce, when will you write your memoirs?"
The minute I want to stop working. I would say I would write my memoirs, but if I tell the truth, I'll say, I'll be missing kneecaps. Or I think they'll say, "Gee, he was so funny and sweet. Who knew he was such a cunt?" If I tell the truth.
Let's see. Norma Jacobitz to Vicki. Will you try to get the Guinness record for closest hairdo to Bruce?
I think I've already won that.
No question.
Let's see.
I think I'm there.
We look like people who were in that Swedish picture, Midsommar. We're in a cult somewhere.
This is brand new for me, the blonde.
In a cult somewhere outside the town of Smorgasbord.
You need red glasses. That's what
I need the red glasses.
Everybody does.
Here's another one from Norm to Bruce. Do you like the fact that the Oscars will not have a host?
No, I don't like the fact that I think that it's interesting. Last year, everyone thought in the industry, people loved that there was no host. They thought, "Oh, it moved along," and people who were not in the industry missed it. They said, "We like having the guy up there, the girl up there, who's funny and guides us through all this, and there's a reference point." And I think they missed that because there are too many award shows, and that one is like, okay, there's the Oscar host. This is the king of show business for one night, and I feel the same way. I think that it misses something when it doesn't have that flavor. They got a ratings bump last year because there was so much controversy. There was Me Too stuff. There was Kevin Hart. There was not having a host. How is it going to turn out? What's going to happen? But of course, they also got a ratings bump, as they always do in years where there are big hit movies. Last year there was Bohemian Rhapsody, Star is Born. There was another $100 million movie that was in contention. I mean, and this year actually they have the same thing going on because 1917, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, Joker. These are all These are all $100 million movies.
Absolutely.
And so they might benefit from that. Whenever there are big movies, that's when the ratings are high. The highest ratings in the modern era were the year of Titanic, because Titanic, until the Avatar came along, Titanic was the
so it's not the host that's going to get people to tune in?
To a degree. I mean
when Billy Crystal was doing
you might get a few points by having somebody, but I don't think that's the case. I think that.
Okay, so what do you think of the Grammy Awards? So it started out so serious because of the whole Kobe thing. So how do you like? It wasn't funny.
It's never funny because they gave up having a host because they want to have more music. They gave up giving a lot of awards.
They gave
maybe 12 awards in 3 hours because they want to have the music. And what's interesting to me is.
Well, how is it different when you... I'm sorry, finish your sentence.
What's interesting to me is that the ratings went down a little bit, and that's probably because the music that's on the Grammy show is not reflective of the audience that watches the Grammy show.
Interesting.
I think a lot of people who like Billie Eilish and like Lizzo and like a lot of those acts are not tuned into the music. I mean, are not TV. They're not. A lot of the people who are watching the Grammy show are not interested in those people, who are the big people in music right now.
Right.
There's a dichotomy there, and I think it's been going on for a few years. I think having a host helped people over that hump when they had somebody like Ellen, who they liked. I mean, LL Cool J is a great guy. He's not a great host. I mean, Alicia is. Fascinating because she's a big star, and she brings her own energy, and she turns the whole thing into kind of a love thing. She's done it whenever she's hosted it, but she is, I think, more accessible than the people who they're giving the awards to.
Yeah.
I mean, they have a unique problem.
So when you did the
because
Grammys,
it's a music
who was
business.
hosting?
Billy, Gary Shandling, Whoopi, Rosie.
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to think of.
I wonder why they stopped. Because they wanted more music. They
Yeah.
stopped with those kind of hosts because they wanted.
Well, because the takeaway was always, wasn't it fabulous? They had Neil Young and the Jackson 5 doing a mashup. You know, I mean, or they did a tribute to Sly Stone, and they had Joan Sutherland sing something. I mean, it was that, you know, the stuff that Ken Ehrlich does, and so it became famous for that, for those moments. And so they had to let the air out of the show so there would be more moments. And they discovered when you give like 84 awards, which is what the Grammys do, you can narrow it down to the most popular things for the audience at home and give all the others off the air. And those people win their Grammys anyway. And I think they've kind of gotten used to that because it's a chance for more people to perform.
Yeah, but it's kind of terrible, like people winning some really big awards or doing it in this little room where nobody's getting to watch.
Well, no, I agree because, I mean, any category that I'd be involved in, you know.
Would be in the little room in the thing.
Although I guess they did spoken comedy album they did on the show. And Chappelle was not there. But spoken word, I think
they didn't do.
Michelle Obama won.
Yeah, that would have been nice to see Michelle.
I don't think she was going to sit there in the audience. I don't know. She was on last year. That's the other thing. She was a big highlight of last year. So because it was the women's year last year. So I guess I'm sure that's why she wasn't back.
How about writing for the Tonys?
I loved it. I've done it like 7 times.
And so, and who's hosted when you've done the Tonys?
Hugh Jackman twice, and Rosie, Nathan. 1 year it was nobody. We did it. Actually, there was 1 year there was a no-host year. I think 1 year was Glenn Close, Nathan, and Gregory Hine.
Okay, so you're writing that banter between the two people that are standing up there who are totally bizarrely paired.
I try and make it a banter-free zone. When I do. I mean, a lot of the shows don't. To me, it almost never works.
It doesn't work. It's hard.
They come on, and also there are people who aren't necessarily funny, and even if they are funny, they're awkward doing whatever.
Yes.
I try to just give them something to say about the category that may be mildly amusing. I don't know. The examples are all different. If you have funny people or it's a funny category, then you can have a good time with it. And the others you just kind of breeze through. You give them something sort of generic to say because people are just looking at them anyway. And
it's a big mistake when they try to make these unfunny people funny and they pair these very strange people together and give them banter. And it's
I always thought the Grammys are weird that way because they still do that, and it's strange because a lot of them are like from two different worlds of music,
right?
And they're still they're like they don't relate to each other at all.
Yeah, it did happen.
Except they have like mutual respect, But
I thought of the show that have you seen Happy Family?
No.
Okay.
I haven't.
Have you seen it, you guys? I cannot recommend if you like procedurals. Wow. I prefer it to Broadchurch. It's unbelievable. It's great.
All right.
It's great. Donna Lowe recommended that to me. So, Pete, we have any more questions?
We do.
Bruce, go ahead.
Yeah. Let's see. Rocky Duran. Tell us about B. Arthur in the Star Wars holiday special.
I can't do that. That's a story I do in my show. I don't want to give it away here.
Don't give it away. Don't give it for nothing.
No.
Well, that's all though.
Giving it away.
Somebody said that you told the best cat joke, so I went and found it online.
Oh, that's
today.
online, yeah. Oh, it's amazing because I thought, well, it's online. I can't do it live, and people began requesting it.
Oh, yeah.
Do the cat joke, and I said to Bette, I have a hit.
You do have a hit.
Now I know how you feel when you have to come out and sing The Rose every night.
It's got like a gazillion hits on it.
I said, they're not unhappy. They want me to do it. And so it's just hysterical. Now I know how singers feel when they... Of course, sometimes singers say, I've got to sing that one again. I mean, Bette doesn't have any hits like that. Well, maybe from a distance. I don't know.
Do you get sick of doing it, or do you like to do it? The cat joke.
Oh, it's fun to do. I haven't done it in a while, but
Will you do it?
Oh, no, I have to. I seriously, it's one of those jokes where you have to remember the structure, and
yes.
if you screw it up, then it's like.
All right.
I'm sorry. You can
That's okay.
You can find it on YouTube.
It's fantastic. All you have to do is Google in Bruce Vilanch cat joke, and it'll
show up.
It's pretty fabulous. So you're writing a play. You're writing a play?
I'm writing a play. I will do one joke, but that's about a favorite joke. I have a current favorite joke.
Okay,
it's
good.
a favorite for a little while, and I think we should close with this.
We're going to close.
All right. I was talking. It started out some time ago. I was talking about San Francisco being a town a foodie town. Mm-hmm. Where there are lots. People are so food centric, mm-hmm. and they know everything, and they know the difference between a garbanzo bean and a chickpea. And the difference between a garbanzo bean and a chickpea is Donald Trump has never had a garbanzo bean on his face.
Oh, God! Oh, my God, I just got that.
That's why I love it. It takes a moment. And there's kind of a laugh, and then all of a sudden there's a roar. They all get it at the same moment.
Really? Because I had a hesitation. Is that what always happens?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And on that note...
Bruce, thank you so much for doing this.
I have to... Wow, thank you. I'm going to go to L.
Oh, all right, so one more question.
Yeah.
Why always a T-shirt with stuff on it?
Because my mother made me dress up and I hated it, and I was never comfortable in real clothing, and so I affected T-shirts, and it became my brand, my trademark, mm-hmm. and so now I have thousands of them.
People probably send them to you.
They do, and some you can wear, and some are like too offensive, and there are websites all over that make great shirts, but you can't wear them in some places because you would be knifed. Mm-hmm. And but I found this one sometimes.
It's pretty fantastic.
It's like the
keyboard for him. It was a pretty fantastic day. So thank you so much. Thank you, Bruce.
Thanks.
And we'll see you next week.
Bye.
Bye.